Okay, well, thank you all for who have joined us this morning or this afternoon, whichever is applicable to where you are today. We're excited to have you here and happy that you have an interest in understanding and learning and contributing about more strategies to engage more small business. We have joined with our partners BBC to basically put on a series of webinars given the body of work and the background of each of our firms in the area of providing consultation, technical assistance, and support to mostly public agencies on best practices and ways to increase small business inclusion in their public contracting. So we've defined this as really a practical application of contracting, project management, and enabling strategies that make robust small business inclusion goals a reality. You can advance the slide. So just by way of background, well, I'll start with the housekeeping, and what we are encouraging you all to do is to just submit your questions in the chat while we're making the presentation, and the three of us are going to kind of monitor that and try to address the questions in the moment, but we've also allotted time at the end of the presentation for additional questions and discussion. So I'm going to do everything we can to respond to all the questions that you all have. As I said, this is a series of webinars that we've teamed up with BBC to bring the community. The public entity community is really kind of the emphasized focus of the presentations and of our work. And we've described these webinars as policies, practices, and programs. And really what we see this as kind of the interconnectivity between best policies, best practices, and best programs that yield the greatest return in including and increasing the presence and participation of small businesses in your public contracting. And I will say that there's an emphasis on construction in the content and in our body of work as Meriwether and Williams. BBC is a broader has a broader focus than just construction. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just briefly introduce the team that you're going to hear more from, and some of us will give you more background, but I'm Ingrid Meriwether. I am the president of Aligned Risk Management Services at Meriwether and Williams. We are a hub international company, and my co-presenters today are my colleagues Lakeisha Bearden and Dr. Kim Abrego, who you will hear more from shortly. You can go to the next slide. And a little bit about the plan for the presentation, just some introductory remarks. Then we're going to talk about small prime contracting. Then we'll move into a discussion around how to increase participation for small business and provide necessary support on larger projects where they're more likely going to be subcontractors, have some closing remarks. And as I said, the questions can flow during the presentation and we'll allow time after as well. You can go to the next slide, Rena. Before we get into some of the content, I want to introduce a representative from our partner BBC, Dr. Bawa, and just ask him to share a welcome with you and a few comments. Samir?
Good morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Samir Bawa. I'm the Managing Director and CEO of BBC Research and Consulting. We are an economic and policy research firm based in Denver, Colorado. We've been conducting contracting equity studies for several decades now to understand outcomes that small businesses and disadvantaged businesses face in government contracting, and using that information to develop or help organizations develop smarter, data-driven policies around contracting inclusion, and helping to inform some of the programs that firms and the great work that Meriwether and Williams has done for a long, long time. We are very happy to be here, very happy to be partnering with Ingrid and her team, and hope that we have uh, a great set of questions and some great discussion here today.
Thank you, Samir. So just by way of background of our firm and our body of work and maybe what experience we bring to the conversation. So our firm for since 1997, so we're almost hitting a 30-year anniversary here, has worked with public entities to essentially address some of the systemic barriers that make it more difficult for small and historically underutilized firms. I'll just use the term hub going forward, hub firms, to participate in contracting. And because we come at this as an insurance risk management firm, we specifically address the issues kind of in the financial categories of access to bonding, access to capital, but go beyond that in terms of a wide range of technical areas that support contractors with capacity development, with a goal towards increasing their ability to bid, compete, and successfully participate in public construction or public contracting. A little bit about what we've managed to learn and bear witness to in the almost 3 decades that we've been engaged in this body of work. We've supported contractors in securing a little over $1 billion of bonding, and this is mostly for firms who are diverse firms. That has enabled them to bid on about $350 million of work. And the statistic we're really most impressed with, not that we're touting ourselves exclusively, but there's something we track that's called a loss ratio. Since bonding is really kind of tracked on the basis of how much is at risk and how much has been lost through defaults and claims, it's called a loss ratio. But our program loss ratio is less than 0.1%. The industry loss ratio in surety bonding is about 24%. And so what we feel like we've been able to help demonstrate over the last 30 years is the true capacity of small firms, despite perceptions that they're higher risk or they lack adequate capacity to perform in a substantive way in public works. We've seen quite the contrary. What we have witnessed is that when you address the systemic barriers, provide technical support, apply good risk management principles, not only can they successfully participate and win work, but they successfully complete work without defaults at a much greater level of success, if you will, than the industry as a whole. And we think that has a lot to do with kind of a lot of artificial barriers, has a lot to do with kind of perceptions. And to be honest with you, the challenge to secure public contracting opportunities is so great for these firms that when they are finally successful in winning a contract, their level of dedication and commitment to successful completion, even if at times it ends up being at a loss, a financial loss to the firm, that dedication is strong because unlike larger firms, smaller firms oftentimes don't get multiple bites at the apple, and consequences of things going awry hit them much stronger. So that's really kind of a nutshell what experience we bring is these decades of working with small contractors, being under contract with public agencies to address these barriers, to provide technical assistance and support, bonding, contract financing, which addresses that important issue of having adequate cash flow, and then risk mitigation to ensure certainty that any kind of contingent liability by the agency owners or others is mitigated. So that's a little background on ourselves. I will also mention that we were a small minority woman-owned firm for about 26 years, 27 years, until just recently, 2 years ago, we were acquired by Hub, which is the fourth largest insurance broker in the world. So we're now part of the Hub family. And I think just one thing I want to make about one statement I'd like to make about that is what I believe it demonstrates, even in a climate that we all can relate to is more challenging today, is that removing barriers for business, whatever they might be, is really just good business. It can be profitable business. Capitalism is built on finding a need and filling it. And so I really respect and appreciate that our parent company, really identified that what we're doing is bringing resources to the marketplace that's enabling more businesses to have access to what they need and to build their businesses and build their capacity. And that's really just smart business. So I hope that continues in the marketplace where larger firms or majority firms see the value in addressing these areas that have been so challenging for small businesses and bring their kind of support and capacity to the marketplace. So enough about us. Want to maybe just do some level setting and some context. I'm probably preaching to the choir here in terms of the folks who have joined. If this is your area of work, none of this will hit you as new, but just provide background of what I would call the why. Why is adding additional strategies, identifying more of the barriers, is a good investment in terms of how you convene public contracting. So one thing that we know is that when you remove barriers for businesses to participate, you enable more competition. And when you enable more competition, that leads to reduced project costs. And we have actually been able to quantify that in our area of work, because one of the things that we do in our programs is remove the barrier of bonding. And bonding typically is required to bid work. So anytime a business wants to submit a bid but can't secure the bond, they don't submit the bid. And you as agencies really have no insight or awareness of these firms and how competitive they might be, because you never see their bids because they don't have the bonds that are required. So in our programs that are backed by public entities, including LA Metro, City of LA, City and County of San Francisco, where these programs have been in place in some cases for 3 decades, anytime we have a contractor for whom we help secure a bond and they're enabled to bid, and the work is being awarded on a low bid basis, there's a cost savings that the owner or sponsor of the project generates, because we've removed a barrier, enabled a firm to bid, and they were the successful low bidder. And those dollars savings, which can be very specifically quantified, because as you know, when bids are submitted, you get the data on the first low bid, second low bid, et cetera. And we track that delta between our contractor, who was the low bid, and the next lowest bidder, who would have been awarded the work if the contractor in our program was not able to submit the bid because they couldn't attain the bond. And we've had single transactions, single bonds that we provided support to a contractor that generated, we had one recently that generated cost savings of $4.4 million on a single contract award. So it's really the evidence that when you remove barrier, bonding being just one, but when you remove barriers, you enable more competition. And because most agencies award projects on a low bid basis, that brings about a reduction in project cost. Local economic growth. I think it's another important context of why it's a good investment to remove barriers and to apply more strategies to increase small business inclusion. And this is data that we got from BBC, that really there's, for every small business that's hired, 58% of their contracting dollars goes back into the local economy versus 22% of contracting dollars that go back to the local economy from a larger firm or from large firms. So there is a very specific local economic multiplicative impact when an agency does more of its contracting with small local firms. And that's really been vetted out through analytics and data research. Capacity building. It's been never that we've had an agency say we have too many bidders. It's been never where they haven't said we'd like to have more bidders. And yes, I see the question about sharing the research data. We will get that information to you. Samir, you probably have something that can be shared that we can distribute on that.
Yeah, we'll leave our contact information if you want to reach out directly to a BBC team member. We'll make sure that we get that information to anyone who wants it.
So capacity building is so critical, and there's an important role for public entities to play in their regions towards the building of capacity of their small local firms. There's a lot of chicken and egg scenarios with small businesses who are trying to participate in public contracting where, you know, they need a track record of doing public works, but they can't get past the challenges of accessing the public work. And so it makes it more difficult for them to build the type of demonstrable capacity that's necessary to qualify for bonding, financing, and in some cases that you'll hear about a little bit later from Dr. Abrego, it makes it difficult for them to build up the track record of having completed a certain number of projects. That sometimes the criteria to even be qualified to bid a project. And a lot of this is really systemic. So what we've experienced is that through very specific structured capacity building, you increase a firm's acumen, business acumen, you increase their scalability, and then again, you increase the pool of contractors who not only increase competition, but in many cases, they bring innovation. And so really another goal to incorporate in your strategy for small business inclusion is to have a capacity building program. And then we all understand that there's some challenges in the marketplace around just the workforce decline in construction. And small businesses, there are many more of them out there than there are larger firms. And so when you build small business capacity, you also build general construction workforce capacity, which we know is something that's critically important. Next slide. So here's just a pretext of what we're going to talk more about in the next few slides. And what we understand, having done business with public entities for, again, as much as 3 decades, is the kind of obstacles we realize are just innate in public contracting. So we understand the limitations around compliance, legal covenants or restrictions. The staff resources for a contract administration may make it more challenging to unbundle projects or to do tailored, targeted contracting for small businesses. The perceived risk associated with small contractors and the real and perceived concerns regarding capacity. Next slide. Great. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lakeisha Bearden. You can go to the next slide, who's going to talk about small business priming. This is something we are major advocates of and see it as really the fastest, most impactful way to increase the participation and the capacity of small businesses is creating strategies for direct contracting with them, which we're referring to as small business primes. Okay, Lakeisha.
Thank you, Ingrid. Good
Mhm.
morning and good afternoon, and to some, maybe even good after morning. My Bearden. I am the Vice President of Program and Operations for Hub International. I oversee our contractor development and bonding programs that we administer on behalf of public agencies. I work directly with our client sponsors to identify barriers and create strategies to increase inclusivity and small business participation. So when we consider policy, we think guidelines, rules, requirements, but practices is about access to opportunities. So when you think small business contracts, you're often thinking subcontractors. How can we get the prime contractor to create and carve out small business contracts? But oftentimes, that is just the baseline for a small business. It's not the ultimate goal for them. Creating small business prime contracts allows the contractor to build contractual, stronger working relationships with the agency, builds the business's resume for future projects as they're scaling. It accelerates their cash flow. Most subcontracts, they do have a pay when paid clause. So we're net 90, 60, sometimes I've even seen net 120. Capacity building is also a key area for these small businesses. When they are utilizing the small business prime, they can own the entire project. They're not limited to a small piece of the scope. They're allowed to really understand the entire schedule. They are looking at certified payroll from the various tiers of their contractors. It also allows the contractor to really position themselves with their small business peers and be a subject matter expert in the space. Whereas your subcontracting opportunity really restricts that contractor to, again, restricted to the prime's payment terms, net 60, net 90. They're hidden under the prime contractor's umbrella. They are not able to really show what their specific best practices are. They are limited in their growth as well. For example, some small business contractors, when they are subcontractors to primes, aren't required to bond. So that's limiting their ability to really bond on certain projects, on public works projects. They're covered under SDI insurance, which is they're trying to bid on public contracts, bonding is required. So that kind of limits their growth. It also hinders their ability to dependent on them, the primes for their revenue growth. Businesses, primes who are having those working relationships with the agencies, if any time that relationship is limited, it really does impact the small business's ability to generate revenue for themselves. And then also it keeps the contractor in the subcontractor type business model. So being able to be a small business and prime really does allow you to compound your growth at a prime level. Next slide. Agencies can create small business prime opportunities through unbundling, best value procurement, and shelter bidding. And we'll go into these in a little bit more detail as we run through the presentation. So next slide, Rena. So unbundling expands your access. It creates right-sized project opportunities. It also right-size your requirements in terms of your bonding and your insurance requirements. But unbundling is not an afterthought. It has to be done in the planning phase. It has to be done in the capital planning phase. And it does require you to have a cross-functional collaboration with your project managers, your architects, your engineers. It's also important to bring in procurement. And we'll talk a little bit more about a best value, a unbundling process that was done well. Next slide, Rena. So the city of Los Angeles had a sidewalk repair program. They had about $35 million that they were allocating to repair the sidewalks in the city of Los Angeles. And what they did was, in their first phase, they set aside or allocated $2.2 million for, $2.2 million specifically for small businesses to bid as prime contractors. They did this through an SOQ process. The SOQ process then allowed contractors to be on a pre-qualified list. There are 70 of those contractors were on the pre-qualified list. 44 of those contractors were first-time bidders. 59 of those contractors received technical assistance from our organization, and 28 received new or increased bond lines, totaling about $11.1 million in bonding capacity. Next slide, Rena. So how does CLC work? Well, first, it's important in the planning phase to make sure that leadership is at all levels within the organization. It really needs to be a business practice, a goal of the organization, of the department. And it's important that it happens, I mentioned earlier, at the capital planning phase. So understanding what types of projects that are coming down the pipeline. Those projects could be anywhere, obviously, sidewalk repair, could also be landscaping, janitorial, street lights, graffiti removal, maintenance. These are the types of contracts that really can be unbundled, but you also need to make sure that you're not just slapping on the same pre-qualification requirements as $1 million project. The requirements and the compliance and have to be right size for these contracts as well. Another important component is your outreach strategy. If you are post it and leaving it type outreach strategy, that's really not going to work for optimizing and increasing the bidders that are looking to bid. In phase 2, you're really looking to create that outreach plan that consists of maybe looking in your database and identifying the NICS codes that are specific to the categories that you're looking for, or the NIG codes, or any contractor's license. You want to have targeted outreach. You could also reach out to contractor agencies, whether that be the NAMACs or the AMACs of the world, and really understand Chamber of Commerce that have contractors that are looking to do work directly with public agencies. Once the SOQ was released, we did conduct some workshops. Workshops are important to really help the contractor break down these large 50, 100, and 100-page documents. A lot of times that's very intimidating for a lot of contractors, especially when they're first-time bidders to an agency. So being able to have a workshop that really breaks that down for them so they're able to respond and understand what they're responding to. Once these contractors submitted their SOQ, the SOQs were evaluated. They were placed on a pre-qualified list. Phase 3, the project delivery. This first initial phase, this item here, which the agency-led training, was actually new. They added this in the second phase of the sidewalk repair program. It was more of a, lessons learned, understanding that the contractors needed a little bit more information and support. So they put this as a requirement in order to move forward to the next, once you receive a package, it was a check item that you had to make sure that you were attended the trainings led by the agency. Once the agency placed you on the list, you were on the recorded list, you had the option to accept or decline the once the award was notified you for the opportunity. And then it would go to the next contractor on the list. Another key thing that I find very important, and Ingrid mentioned this earlier on, is we work directly with the contract administrator. And why that's important, we put together a job start checklist. And as you know, when you unbundle projects, it does create a lot more projects, and it may be overwhelming for the existing team to really immerse themselves in being able to handle multiple projects. So the job start checklist was the tool to utilize with in conjunction with the administrator as a support, as their right hand, so that we could work with them directly, the contractor, and make sure that they had all the documents submitted before actually submitting the documents to the contract administrator. Once the contractor started the project, we do have what we call a field support project manager who helps the contractor on daily task activities or helps them in the field, because this is not only an opportunity for the contractor to be successful, but also for the agency and their program. Next slide, Rena. So the first phase of the program started in 2016 and ended in 2022. Like I mentioned, it was a $2.2 million budget. At the time, the first phase had a $100,000 max work order, 35 of the contractors on the pre-qualified list. 22 of those contractors were first-time bidders. 19 of those contractors were enrolled in our contractor development and bonding program, and we were able to help contractors, about 7 contractors, increase their bond line or obtain new bond lines at a $1.7 million value. Next slide, Rena. The second phase of the program started in 23, and it's still going on currently. As you can see, the budget increased about 104% to $4.5 million. The work orders are now at $150,000 max work orders. 34 were on the pre-qualified list. 22 of those contractors were first-time bidders. You'll see that our contractor participation in the program was over 50% at 29 contractors that currently enroll in our program. And 7 of those contractors were repeated from the first phase. We were able to increase our bond line. 15 contractors received new or increased bond line at $7.3 million. And our technical assistance efforts really increased as well. So overall, this really just shows that how unbundling done well will increase direct contracting opportunities with the agency, as well as really help build the capacity of a small business contractor as well. Next slide. So best value is another practice that we find is best option for really generating small business opportunities, because you're not just basing it on the value of the contract. It's not based on low bid. You are able to really gauge the contractor's qualifications, their experiences, the type of innovation they bring over to your organization. You are also can put looking into what type of community benefits are being added into the contract. So it really is an opportunity to kind of score what are the organization's overall goals for the objective of the project. And Ingrid, I don't know if you wanted to add a little bit more here.
Sure. Yeah. So, we know that best value contracting has been around a long time. It hasn't always, and I'd say rarely, does it include values around small business inclusion, for example. We were a participant with LAWA for a rather large convening, the automated people mover system, where they were scoring inclusivity. And as a result of that, and that it was significant allocation for how well the contractor presented their plan, as well as their resume and background in terms of small business inclusion, and how that became a 10% scoring criteria of the overall proposal. So pretty significant. I think you all know that on these very large projects, the spread between firms is generally less than 10%. So you attach a significant weight on inclusivity or other values of the organization, and you'd really be surprised when, excuse me, these large firms have to compete around how well they're going to achieve their small business inclusion. They get very creative. It becomes something that gets the kind of assessment, treatment, creativity, innovation that they typically would reserve towards methods, experience, and approach. And so in this one instance, for what was I don't know what it ended up being, about a $3 billion project, the firm who was ultimately selected, their inclusivity plan included a couple of things that were really innovative and impactful. One was where the firm was going to do essentially small business prime, well, I won't call them prime, but small business set-aside opportunities. They went through the entire scope of work. They identified areas of the work that would yield to small business inclusion, and they let the small businesses bid on that work directly with them, as opposed to being, second or third tier subs to their first tier subs. They got to contract directly with the prime or the JV in the project. That meant there was certainty that there was small business inclusion, that the goals were met because the prime interacted with them directly. It allowed for mentor protege and then develop a relationship with the prime that does not typically happen. And what it led to, also their total commitment for small business inclusion was $80 million more than what was required in the RFP. So $80 million more of small business contract award commitment is significant, as you can imagine. So scoring inclusivity or small business inclusion in some way, whether it's best value or anywhere you have a contracting model that allows you to put weight on other factors of consideration, can really bring about a very dramatic and impactful difference in the outcome. Back to you, Lakeisha.
Yes, and I think the next slide, I think that is Kim. Next.
Nope, we got sheltered bidding first. Let me touch on sheltered bidding a little bit. This is also in some agencies talked about as set-asides. I know some folks find that term can be controversial, but some agencies actually still use that term. But essentially, creating contract opportunities that are only small certified firms are allowed to bid. LA Metro is the example we use most often, but other agencies do that. We've done work with City and County of San Francisco for 30 years. They've been doing small business, what they call set-asides, for, 25 years now. And we have really seen how it accelerates the growth and capacity of small firms when they have a pipeline of contract opportunities that they only have to bid and compete with their peers, with other small firms. So it is one of the best vehicles for direct contracting engagement of small firms. It's one of the best vehicles to support their ability to build their own capacity in a expedited timeline versus if they were subcontractors. It addresses the fact when firms only have opportunities as subcontractors, they have to try to build relationships with multiple primes. And that just by nature is more challenging for a small firm with fewer resources to go about and try and build those large prime relationships. And you all are probably aware, a lot of times the large firms have the small certified firms that they prefer to work with, and it's very difficult for a new firm to gain access or an entry. So it's just a very challenging environment as a small firm if you are mostly limited to subcontracting opportunities. So shelter bidding, set aside programs, this is also where you get to witness this cost savings when you create avenues for small firms to be more competitive, to compete with their peers. And really, it's a great way to expand your contracting pool and increase participation, because then these firms not only go on to do more of this type of set aside work, especially if you're creating a constant pipeline of opportunities, but they become stronger candidates as subcontractors, because if they have built up a year or more of history of working directly with an agency, meeting all your compliance requirements, developing those relationships, then they're seen as a more valuable potential sub to a prime firm. So it really kind of checks a lot of boxes in terms of developing the small business capacity by optimizing their opportunity to do business with you on a direct basis. Next slide. Great. I think we are going to hand this off to Dr. Kim Abrego. And Kim, if you can start with a little bit of background of you and your firm, I think we all would like to hear more about that.
Sure. Thanks, Ingrid and Lakeisha. Good morning and afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. And I love seeing where everybody is from all across the US. It's great that we have such a broad group of people here that are interested in this. As Ingrid mentioned, I'm Kim Abrego. I'm COO of DRS, which is also a Hub-owned organization. We're Hub's Disaster Recovery Services division. And you might be thinking, why on earth is a disaster recovery firm part of this conversation? And I can tell you why, is we've been doing a disaster recovery, so construction after catastrophic events, hurricanes, floods, fires, wildfires, you name it, for the last 25 years. And one of the biggest ways to get a community back up and running, there's actually two. One is reopen schools, and the other is get small businesses back open. And so that's why we as a firm have just taken a very unique interest in how we support small businesses, as well as there's an influx of FEMA money that will come in after a declared event. And if you take Samir's data, how can we take that injection of funds and keep that local, or the majority of that local? And it's through the use of small businesses. So also a unique intersection is, how do we take federal small business rules and overlay those with state and local? And so understanding that intersection well. I also have the unique perspective in that I am the former chair of NIGP, the National Institute of Government Procurement, their business council, so representing businesses large and small in the government procurement space. And I own my own woman-owned business, separate to this firm. And so a lot of the challenges that we speak about here in terms of capacity building, in terms of compliance, I run into day to day as I run that business. So I have the unique opportunity of sitting in a very large organization, as well as running my own small, and then all of the meat in between that I just spoke about. What I want to talk about today and share with you is Ingrid and Lakeisha talked about small primes, right? And how we can bring small businesses in that prime role. But what happens when we have large contracts with subcontractors? And how can we really maximize and optimize the use of small businesses in that context? What we've seen, what examples that are out there across the nation, and how we can bring that together, really develop and grow small business inclusion. So with that, on the next slide, what I want to touch on here is awarded isn't the same as delivered, right? So small business inclusion should not be the bookends of the conversation. It should not be, hey, when we're soliciting the contract or the RFP, we're going to put our goals in, we're going to award, and then whatever happens in the middle happens in the middle. And then at the end, we're going to do a closeout report and see where we landed, right? That's not ideal. So what is ideal is, can we implement processes, procedures, practices that support that all the way through, so that that closeout report is actually a glowing report, just like Ingrid shared in some of her examples of how small business inclusion not only met but exceeded the goals. And you can see here that, the federal government, and I know most of us are talking about state and local projects, but you can see at the federal government that they've got rules in place because there are so many gaps in this process, right? So you can see here 35% of active DOT, OIG grant and procurement fraud cases all involve DBE fraud, right? Why is that? That's an easy miss. So making sure that we are putting practices in place that help support their inclusion. And then I've got another stat here from Alaska DOT's disparity study where 59.6% of small firms were seldom or never solicited when a contract had no goal. So, we start with the goal, and then, of course, what are we doing in the middle to really support the capacity building and the support provided to these small businesses? So, moving on to the next slide here, where we're really looking at this is the CM's role is critical to how this can be a success, right? And the reason being the CM is present for the whole project. So the owner sees the quarterly reports, the primes see their scope, the subs see a smaller subset of that scope, the construction manager sees the entire project, they see every phase, they see everybody, they see every sub. So they have just such a unique perspective on the project, seeing the entire board, and that really helps support, and they can support small business inclusion throughout the project, as well as identify early on when small businesses are having challenges. So that's something that I want to talk through in these next few slides. So moving on. So with that CM's vantage point, pre-construction, what can the CM do to set baselines for the award before the first shovel hits the ground, right? So this is administrative. It sounds administrative, but this is really setting the baseline and the foundation for success. So reconciling commitments to the schedule of values. So matching bid stage promises against that schedule of values, package by package, dollar by dollar before the work starts. And really understanding, is this schedule of values or is this subset of work, does this match the capacity of the subcontractor? And can they actually do this work? And identifying if there are any gaps before the work starts, right? And then we can address that before the work starts and it doesn't become an issue later. So that moves into flagging the gaps if you've reconciled those commitments, and then setting the yardstick for future reports. So that baseline then becomes how you're measuring the success moving forward. So there's no ambiguity on what on track means, right? Everybody's on the same page. And this is also a very good place to identify where there might be additional support that's needed that the CM can provide to those subcontractors. So that's step one. Step two on the next slide is shutting down post-award substitution. And so in the stat I referenced earlier with a lot of the DBE fraud that the OIG identified, a lot of it was around this 49 CFR 26 rule that prohibits a prime from terminating a small business post-award without good cause. Right. So we've all seen it where a prime will use small businesses to win an award and then never bring that small business in as a subcontractor and or sub out subcontractors without good cause. So what the CM can do in this step is really implement contract controls with the support of the owner that any substitution needs confirmation and concurrence and documented justification between the owner, between the prime, between the subcontractor. And when we do that, then we're ensuring that the subcontractors can stay in place, right? If they deserve to stay in place and are doing the work well, and that any substitution is escalated and elevated early on in the process. And so you can see here in the last bullet, without this control in place, the bid listing becomes a bid winning tactic and it's not implemented, which is where we're really looking to support is the implementation. And I've included here an example from Arizona DOT that they actually assess liquidated damages if there's a substitution, a wrongful substitution. Moving on, so step three, another place that a construction manager can step in and support the owner and the programs and the intent of the programs is to onboard every small sub individually. Ingrid, Samir, and Lakeisha and I and others on this call were at the EIP event not too long ago, and one of the topics or points of discussion was some of this information is often relayed to the prime, but then it's noted that that information doesn't make it down to sometimes even first tier subs, let alone 6, 7, 8 tier subs, right? So how do we, oh, sorry, you can go on to the next slide. There we go. Okay. So how do we make sure that these lower tier subs are getting the same information? And it's to onboard every small sub individually. And this is another role that the construction manager can play. So as noted here, a kickoff meeting with the GC is not the same as a meeting with each small subcontractor where you're discussing payment terms, retainage schedule, etc. You're discussing bonding and insurance. What are they required to do? What are they required to document? Right size to their scope. And you're also, and I'll touch on this a little bit later in this section, you're giving them a point of contact. So what can often happen is the prime is the sub's client, right? The prime is the one who's paying them. So if they have an issue to escalate, there may be reservation or hesitation to take that to the prime. So is there somebody who is in a neutral spot who can provide them with that avenue, and providing the point person to them during this meeting gives them the support, which again, and I'll keep echoing this throughout this section, will escalate and elevate issues early so that they're not then boiling up towards the end of the project and resulting in termination of the subcontractor. So those are 3 steps. And then moving into monitoring. So another role that the CM can play is monitoring and tracking committed dollars versus paid dollars monthly. We would think that this is standard issue and that everybody's doing this. We can speak from experience that that is not the case, right? So it's often either requested at closeout or reported at closeout. How much did you pay your subcontractors instead of on a monthly basis, where again, if there's a discrepancy, this can get elevated and escalated early. There are systems that I think many of us have heard of. 2 of them are listed here. B2G Now, I think, is the most prevalent system. Elation Systems is another one, where many agencies are requiring monthly reporting on what they have paid, what they have been paid by the owner, and then what they're paying to their subcontractors. And are those the approved subcontractors on that contract? I've noted here Chicago Transit Authority, who is noted in a federal audit. I think the audit dates back to 2019, but still relevant to the conversation, where they use it in real time to track compliance and have really done a good job with that. And one thing I want to note here for some of you that are on the call, because I know it looks like we've got a lot who are running SBE programs within an agency. And we're talking about a CM who may be taking on some role within the compliance aspect of your inclusion programs. So the question might be, well, why do we need the CM to do that if we have an organization or department that does it? Something to note with the Chicago Transit Authority's audit was that they actually did identify a gap. Even though CTA was doing a great job in their monthly reporting, they identified where there were prompt payment clauses that were missing from subcontractors' contracts. There were some other just small pieces, right? And so, and CTA, I think at the time had a department of 14. But having a construction manager who has vested interest in the success of the project and is only focused on that specific project can then be a second set or redundancy. It's not a duplication of effort. It's more of a risk management and project success. As Ingrid talked about at the beginning, these are just true project success tools and project management tools, but bringing that additional set of eyes and ears to the project can really support the success. And then Lakeisha touched on this. I want to touch on it again, next slide, because it's so important, is why payment speed matters. So a little bit of data here, and I think many of you have seen this. If not, it'll be opening, but standard, even if standard net 30 is the payment term, most small businesses only have 27 days of cash on hand. So right now the math doesn't math, right? They're already short. And then you're going to add 5 to 10% of retainage. If that trickles down to these tiered subs, they're now even shorter. And so is there a way to address payment terms and make them more timely so that these small businesses are not under a crunch? The $280 billion cost of slow payment statistic here is an interesting one that I want to double click on for a second. So this was done by Rabbit, a firm out there who runs construction estimating and tools and online platform. But this $280 billion stat is really comprised of four pieces, which are interesting. So they did a survey of general contractors and subcontractors, and 98% of GCs reported that they racked up interest and fees for financing costs from floating payments. So that's part of this $280 billion stat. The other piece was that 61% of the GCs reported an 11% markup to their piece of the contract, specifically to cover financing costs and payment delays because they know they're going to be there. So the owner is really incurring additional costs that the prime or the GC could be adding in because they're expecting payment delays. So bid markups that are passed to the owner. Lost productivity and schedule delays. So 92% of the GCs in the study reported that work was delayed or stopped due to payment delays, which then, of course, delays the entire project. Nobody wants that. And this one I find interesting, administrative drag. The GCs reported an average of 73 hours a month managing and chasing payments. That's a lot, right? So that's how that $280 billion stat racks up. So just interesting those components when really if we can set payment terms that are timely, we're addressing all of those pieces. And then the 82% of contractors report payment delays over 30 days, up from 49% just 2 years earlier. So it's trending in the wrong direction, and let's see if we can get that changed. All right, so moving on, some actionable practices. So I've laid out the foundation, why the CM's role is important, what they can do to support the inclusion goals, to support the capacity, and some direct pieces that if you're not doing these, hopefully you can take away from today and either reach out to us if you want to learn more about how to do them and or just if you have the resources in hand, implement them. But bonding and capital support, providing that directly. So Ingrid and team are fantastic at this. This LA Metro Contractor Development and Bonding Program, right? Well aware of this. But you can see here, bonding capacity is consistently the single biggest barrier in keeping small firms out of large project bidding. And to circle back to the very beginning, we want more businesses competing for the work, right? We just want a more competitive environment and we want best value for these things. So how do we do that? We do this through bonding and capital support directly. So you can see here what LA Metro did, and I think I may have seen some LA Metro folks. I know I saw Caltrans on, and I have a shout out to you later on in the deck, but it really zero cost to participating firms, which I think is great, technical support on bidding, estimating, and contract performance. And then this last bullet, a one-time subsidy towards a CPA prepared financial statement, which is a paperwork barrier, right? So that's often step one in trying to get bonding capacity is really showing that you have financial statements so that are approved by CPA. Moving on, actionable practice number 2, mentor protege tied to real scopes. So you can say you have a training program, but general training tends to move the needle less than structured mentor protege arrangements that are very specific to that subcontractor, to that small business, and their unique challenges on that unique project. And the way that you can help support those is through this mentor protege type arrangement. Sound Transit has a great one. Here's my shout out to Caltrans, who has a great one. You can see where those work well. And then this interesting stat, another one for LA Metro, 90% $90 million in task orders. Of that, for a certain project, 45% went to certified firms, and they have through this contracting outreach and mentoring plan, right? So, and they actually hired their prime on that project site, specifically hired a third party to support the small business mentor protege component for that project. The program started out with 14 small businesses, 10 DBEs, and 4 DVBE firms, and it expanded to 21 SBs and 17 DBE firms over the life of the project. So definitely trending in the right direction, shows that that type of support works. And in this case, to carry the theme of this section, the CM can also provide that role. So instead of hiring a third party, can you leverage the CM to play the role of the mentor protege? Again, they have that visibility, they have that unique interest in the success of the project, and there isn't that potentially implied conflict of interest between the sub and the prime that may crop up. Moving on, actionable practice number 3. So this theme is run throughout, name a liaison with real authority. And so there's a couple of examples here at the federal level where there's an ombudsman type role that's designated on a project. And the reason that this is important, and I should have underlined with real authority, is because you want somebody on a project who can advocate for that small business to the powers that be to get resolution for the issue, right? So if you read here, the italicized print at the bottom, a small firm with nowhere to escalate a stuck payment can lose 6 figures sitting in limbo. A designated advocate with real authority unsticks it in weeks instead of quarters, right? And if you go to that cash on hand stat, you add this into it, you can see where all of this type of support is really required for the success and capacity building that we're looking to do. And then actionable practice number 4, build the escalation ladder before you need it. So we've talked through this a little bit as well, where we don't want issues to sit under the surface and all of a sudden they bubble up and require termination. So what does the escalation process look like? And if the CM is onboarding each subcontractor individually, they can talk through this escalation process so that we surface issues, concerns, problems early on in the process and hopefully never get to step 4. So in looking at this, what a potential escalation process could look like is documenting a support conversation. If that doesn't resolve the issue, providing formal notice. That doesn't resolve the issue, developing a recovery plan, and then ultimately termination if we've gone through these steps, right? But termination really should be the last step, not the first step. Otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of small businesses that could have been saved by a quick phone call or quick, something to bridge the gap in understanding or the gap in service that cropped up. Moving on, one thing, and Ingrid touched on this earlier, but it's the elephant in the room, and I wanted to touch on it here. This is legally durable in the current environment. We know there are a lot of changes that are going on, and throughout the deck, we've used SBE, DB, DVB, right? We know that terminology is also in flux and what's accepted, what's not accepted. What I want to just double down on here is what we're talking about today is built on mechanics, not classifications. Whatever term, we're looking at good business practices that support small business inclusion, right? Good project management that supports small business inclusion. So please don't get hung up on the terminology. Really look at what the underpinning of what we're talking about is, because that's really what we're looking to do is build that success long term. And then moving on, another big question out there, as I present this, and I've been asked this question before, is you're saying that the CM can do all of this, but aren't you just putting more scope on the CM and not paying them for it, right? And you might get some of this pushback from a CM. So I want to also address this up front is in some cases, especially in a CMAR contract, a lot of what we're talking about here is already priced into the fee. right? So if a sub defaults, the scope has to be relaxed. All of that stuff is already included in a CMAR, and the construction manager is taking on that risk. So why wouldn't they want to ensure the success in that type of contract arrangement? And then also small business participation plans and commitment forms are already there at the beginning. What is potentially new, right? A dedicated liaison or that formal and or formal mentor protege admin type role. Monthly reporting, if that's not already included, are things that potentially are new or sitting outside of the traditional CM scope as we've seen it to date. What you can do here is work with your procurement folks and look at how you can include these in the RFP so that when your CMs are responding, they're pricing accordingly. So we're not asking CMs to take on additional work unpaid. If we're upfront with the requirements and can give them the opportunity to price it into their fee, then as you can see here in the last bullet, it's not a favor asked for after the fact, and we're ensuring success across the board. So to sum it up, the takeaway slide, what we're suggesting you put into your next CM contract, requiring monthly committed versus actual utilization reporting. If you use the B2G Now system, that's great. Whatever system you want to use, that's by trade and visible to the owner. That again allows for discrepancies or issues to be identified very early instead of on a closeout report. Requiring that the CM and owner approval for any small business substitution. So again, shutting down that substitution in the middle of the project unless there's good cause. Developing that support and escalation protocol, again, to identify issues and help support those early. Requiring a closeout debrief and participation reconciliation. And then if you want that liaison role or mentor protege type role, pricing it into your RFP deliverable and not leaving it out of the RFP, but then expecting it on the back end as a deliverable. And so, to end this section, next slide, the award is the promise, but we really believe that the CM can make it real in these large type contracts.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Really great content. And that really concludes our portion of the presentation. And I just wanted to mention a couple things to maybe recap kind of where we started and where we ended. So we really started talking about the why. Why is this important? Why is this developing stronger, more robust best practices in small business contracting is a worthy investment that generates a return to an agency? I mean, you're obviously achieving your goals of more small business inclusion, but that multiplicative local economic impact is very real, can be quantified in terms of your ability to drive more local contracting dollars in your local community because they will multiply more so than they do with larger firms. I remember a study that the state of California did a number of years ago to kind of justify their small business program. They had set a 25% goal and they were being challenged about, well, this ultimately is going to cost more to the state to, kind of have a contracting model that requires so many small businesses who they felt wouldn't be as competitive as a large business. And in the study, they found that for every dollar spent with a small business over a larger business or a large prime, they got 3-to-1 net new jobs as a result, and they got 3-to-1 what they called net new revenue growth when they did business with a small firm over a large firm. And they concluded the reason why is that when you hire a small business, they have to hire more people. They don't have like large primes, a deep bench of folks who are doing other things that, then get brought into a new contract. A small firm's going to have to go out and hire new folks to prosecute whatever the contract work they've been awarded. So you get more new jobs, and then you get more new net contracting or more new revenue growth. And they determined that was the case because the small businesses are going to spend 99 cents of every dollar in contract award they've been given because they don't have the in-house resources that larger firms do. So just really by nature of them being small, what they have to do to perform on a contract actually increases the number of jobs that are created, as well as this kind of local economic impact of net new revenue growth. So there's really a compelling why that you want to look at what you can do to increase your strategies and deploy some of these best practices. We talked about what some of those contracting practices are, strategies around unbundling, the importance of sheltered bidding type program. I cannot emphasize that enough. We have got to witness quite a few small firms who have participated in sheltered bidding over, 3, 4, 5 year period and seen the rapidity of their growth, the rapidness of their growth because they have these right-sized direct contracting opportunities. So we talked about the importance of that. And then we finished up with Dr. Abrego and really the role that your CM can bring to the table in helping you have greater success. I think one thing that she mentioned that in our experience is hugely important, and that's kind of that being that point of contact, acting in that omnibus role is so critical because a lot of agencies, really talk about their lack of privity of contract with subcontractors. And they kind of leave them between a rock and a hard place. If they complain to the prime, as Kim said, that's their client. So they can be very reluctant, even if they're experiencing, harmful consequences from something that's happening on the project that, maybe the prime is contributing to. They are reluctant to approach them about it, let these issues linger, especially things like payment. Because how many of us would want to go complain to our client who we are looking for the next opportunity from? So having a third party with authority, as Kim said, who they can approach, maybe even in an anonymous way to get their issues addressed, is just so critically important. And so with that, we have about another 10, or for those of you who want to hang around a little bit further for additional questions, or if people just want to contribute, we'd love to hear from anyone who has a best practice or a strategy that has led to, the kind of successful outcomes that we're speaking to today. We would love to have you contribute that to the conversation. But at this point, can we turn on the raise hand feature, Rena, so that we can let people just kind of speak up when they have something they want to discuss? And while folks are thinking about questions or preparing a comment, I did want to give you a little bit of a precursor. As we said, this is a series of webinars that BBC and our team have partnered up to bring about. The third one that will be coming, we're kind of still putting that in the works, but it's the third P. So BBC started with policies a couple of months back, the webinar that they presented. We're talking today about practices, and the next seminar webinar will be on programs. So we'll go into more detail about barrier removal programs, the work that our firm has been involved in. And BBC will also have a role. I think one of the things that BBC can speak to, having done probably more disparity studies than just about any other firm, one thing that we know that when they get to the recommendations, how to fix where you have deficiencies, there are some common things that always come up. Bonding always comes up, insurance always comes up, access to capital always comes up. And so I think we can learn from disparity studies. They have an ongoing value in really getting at the crux of what historically has prevented more inclusion of small firms that's kind of across the board with public agencies. So that'll be some of the content that we will speak to in our next webinar that you'll be hearing about. Okay, does anyone, Rena, everybody can raise their hand or be unmuted?
Yes, anyone can
Oh,
raise their hand. Please use that feature. If you also want to put your question in the chat, please do so and I'll read it out.
well, either we did oh, here we go.
Oh,
Katrina?
yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Katrina.
Good morning, everyone.
Good
Katrina
morning.
Blair with High Speed Rail Authority. We recently implemented an owner-controlled insurance program for commercial insurance.
Yes.
So we're really excited about that because it helps small firms who were not able to carry insurance or have, expensive insurance requirements. My question is, do we have any kind of owner-controlled bonding programs or something that, agencies can look at to cover small firms in that regard?
Absolutely. So first, want to give you accolades for implementing an OSIP. Insurance is a big challenge for small firms. A couple of reasons. Their insurance costs, their insurance rates are always substantially higher than a larger firm, and it's not because they're higher risk or claims. It's the way the industry rates insurance premiums on a volume basis. So when you're a small firm and your revenues are, let's just say under $20 million, your rate is probably 3 times higher than a firm whose, revenue is at $1 billion, not due to fault of the firm. So when you implement an OSIP, you really help to eliminate that disparity between the cost of insurance for a smaller firm versus medium or larger firms. So accolades, we can make that a topic of the next session too, in terms of how to deploy an OSIP in a way that really eliminates the insurance barrier for smaller firms. In terms of a similar model to bonding programs, that's really kind of what we do. We have had bonding programs that are sponsored by public agencies in place going back 30 years. Our longest program, City and County of San Francisco. And essentially how it's similar to an OSIP is in an OSIP, you have a certain level of the project risk that you are retaining because you have a high deductible or a high self-insured retention, and you are doing that in exchange for removing the insurance barrier, but also cost savings, because the statistics say that an OSIP will save you, anywhere between 1 or 2% in your project costs versus the traditional approach to insurance. So with that as a baseline of why you would put an OSIP in place, it similarly supports a bonding assistance program where the owner provides resources to be able to post collateral for contractors to help them qualify for bonding, which is really the crux of the programs that we administer. And you'd be amazed at how really very little investment can yield to very significant outcomes in terms of removing the bonding barrier. So I'll give you an example. We talked about LA Metro. We've had a bonding assistance program in place there. I think we're going into 8 or 9 years now that they sponsor. It means that when we initiated the program, they set up a collateral pool for us of $4 million. We're still working off that same collateral pool here 7 or 8 years. City and County of San Francisco set up a collateral pool 30 years ago. We're still working off that same collateral pool without having to increase it. And the collateral pool is really just a facility that allows you to basically share risk with the bonding company, similar to how you're sharing risk in an OSIP with the insurance company, because you have a certain dollar value of that risk that you're responsible for before the carrier pays. This is really the same model. You're sharing risk with a bonding company that mitigates their risks, that enables them to support a bond for a contractor who would not otherwise qualify. And what you're getting in return is you're obviously removing the bonding barrier, you're enabling more competition. And as I used the example earlier, when you remove the bonding barrier, that then allows folks to submit a bid with the required bond and they're the low bidder, you're getting a return on your kind of contingent liability by way of the cost savings that that firm brought to you through the low bid process. And then I'll just reiterate, in the 30 years we've been doing this, we've only had 2 defaults. And they were actually very minor defaults. And so our owners have been able to leverage a relatively small amount of, again, contingent financial risk. In most cases, these programs are set up where the owner doesn't even fund the collateral pool. The collateral pool is established as a line of credit facility that's typically unsecured with their financial institution partner. And with all the risk mitigation that's incorporated in a program, our owners have only had 2 defaults in 31 years, I think now. And so, again, very similar, Katrina. I'm glad you brought the comparison of an OSIP because they're very similar models, a willingness to share a little risk in exchange for removing a barrier and bringing about more competition because you've eliminated one of the areas that prevents small businesses from participating. And then I'll preview an announcement we expect to be making in the next couple of months. Our programs have traditionally been where the owner provides this collateral pool that I mentioned for a program, but we are now talking with a third-party financial resource who we believe will be helping us by creating a collateral pool for surety bond support through a third party. That means that the owner of a project doesn't have to provide that resource. So that's really going to be a game changer in that we'll be able to bring this model of an approach to agencies to really essentially reduce and in many cases just eliminate the barrier that bonding has been for so long. Katrina, did I answer your question?
Yes, yes, that was fantastic. Thank
All
you.
right.
I'll be happy to share this this new model with the bonding with my leadership.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, thank you.
Uh-huh. Well, we can extend a couple more minutes. Were there any other questions? Okay, well, hearing none, this gives us an opportunity to end exactly or pretty close to on time, which is always one of our goals. We value your time. We want to thank you again, as Kim said, for your interest in the subject matter, for your participation today, and be on the look for an announcement coming your way to present the date and content of our next webinar in partnership with BBC. So thank you all for your participation and have a great rest of the day and rest of the week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.